My name is Helina Metaferia. I am an interdisciplinary artist working at the intersection of visual art and performance art. I'm also assistant professor in the visual art department at Brown University. I've been an artist for as long as I can remember, and the journey from being a creative person as a child to becoming a professional has taken me quite a while, but I always started with a curiosity and the interest to think about people and the world that we live in the context of what could be new, what could be different, and it led me down to the path of the arts. And so I was nurtured in the public art system or the public school system in the Washington, D.C. area where I grew up. I grew up in Silver Spring, Maryland. I was nurtured by my teachers, and they saw like a little bit of talent. And then I learned that I could actually be a professional artist just by taking classes. And then I was the first in my family to become an artist. And so I went to school for art. And it's been a journey of creativity and wonder and excitement ever since. It's been a lifestyle, it's been a lot of fun, and it's what brings me joy. Race and ethnicity isn't something that I think about specifically in my practice, but it comes up because my work deals with identity and my own lived experience. And so cultural identity and this idea of belonging has been a through line in my practice. I find that everyone's work is informed by some aspect of race because especially if you're working with identity in your work, but whether you are a person who's people tend to focus about your work being in the context of race tends to be if you're a person of color. So I've been constantly in these conversations around this idea of race. And I think part of it is because I'm an artist who's curious about the world, but because I'm a person of color, I tend to be more in conversations with that as a theme. My work is figurative, and so there are Black and brown bodies primarily in my work. And so that's also something that I'm very intentional about. And a lot of my practice it focuses in on activist legacies and resistance movements that inform our present day conditions. And so I do a lot of research in archives, and I'm focused in on the people I'm in conversation with who are in the central form of the central figures in my artwork. And then I adorn them with the legacies that allow them to take up space and to operate within the systems that we have today. So I'm interested and curious about ancestry, generations, and the politics that inform our present. And this does inherently intersect with race. And yet I do believe all artists, even if they're working in abstraction or formalism, their work is also influenced by race, even if it's their privilege to not have to talk about race. In the visual art department at Brown University, we've seen an increase in the amount of people who've enrolled to become visual art majors since the pandemic. And I believe that art is always a go-to during challenging times. It is a way for us to synthesize and process sometimes what we can't do necessarily in other mediums. We can do it intuitively, but also concretely through the visual arts and all art forms. And so I do believe that humanity has always made art. We've always used our hands and our minds and our hearts, and we've organized that around using our tools around us to express ourselves. And so that's something that will continue. It will continue in a recession. It will continue in war, in times of war or economic crisis or political crisis. It is also an outlet. And so inherently, I think people are attracted to arts because they find some sort of catharsis for their own life in the art form. And as they mature their practice and they get more tools and professionalize their practice, they learn that it's not just always about the me, but it can become about the we. And so it becomes a way to communicate with other people who may also be experiencing something very similar. If the work comes from a personal narrative, it's also a way to contribute to discourse and to get other people engaged and to think about how we can co-create together. I really look at artists as visionaries. And we're just a few steps ahead of what maybe more mainstream popular culture has served us. I think artists are always kind of on the fringes, thinking about other ways that we can exist and coexist as a society. And so the artist role, I think, is very important. It's very fundamental. And although we aren't always celebrated within a lot of cultures and social systems by receiving appropriate funding through whether it's government or through private sector, artists continue to make, and we will always do that, whether it's tied to economic gain or not, whether it's tied to career success or not. I think most people who have the impulse to create, we do it from a genuine place, and we do it because the world needs it. And in some ways, I look at artists as healers. The message that I have for the world is to continue to believe in yourselves. It's a very dark time that we're in right now, socially and just on so many levels. And I really am a big fan of hope as not a hoaxy thing or a corny thing, but as an actual tool, a medicinal tool to get people through challenges. And so the message that I have is to continue to believe in yourselves and believe in each other. And ultimately, as corny as it may sound, my favorite medium out of all of my practices, whether it's visual art, whether it's performance art, whether it's video art or social practice, is actually love. And so I really look at that as infusing, like I try to infuse love in everything that I do. And even when it's challenging, and the biggest love that you can give is also to yourself. And so like, I just want to encourage people to continue to think and to feel that connection with each other and ourselves, even when it feels daunting. And so that's my ultimate message. What surprised me most about my career is how it was not a straight line at all to become a working artist and to become an art professor. It really had a lot of curves and challenges. And a lot of those challenges were access. The art world can be very elite and very insular and very much about where you went to school or who you know, kind of a thing. And so I didn't understand that when I was naively trying to pursue an art career without any sort of artists in my family or anyone to tell me how to do it. It really requires a lot of role models and people that are willing to give back and to be generous to help you understand how to navigate that system. Didn't know that that was going to be a possibility. And then how much of the other part of it was, besides access for me, was the internal dialogue and the internal struggles. No one will believe in your work or care about your work more than you. Not your parents, not your teachers, not an audience of supporters or followers or whatever. Ultimately, you have to go into the studio every day. And there's a ton of excuses, just like, anything that it takes work. So just like working out is like work. You have to go to the gym every day, or anything you want to better yourself in. Having an art practice really is that discipline. And so I think my trajectory had a lot of ups and downs and turns. And I think a lot of that was learning myself, getting very crystal clear on myself, and knowing what's possible. And then the other aspect to it is having leadership and mentorship. And so when I went to graduate school, it was many years after my undergraduate degree. And it was because of somebody who simply said, come study with me and I can help you through your next level. And that was a huge breakthrough for me. So in my own practice as a professor, I try to offer mentorship or guidance and offer transparency as to what being an artist looks like from my practice as well. And I think the more people that are more generous, the easier it becomes. But I do think that the art world is designed to be a little bit more insular and to not be as transparent, because it provides this certain elitism, which is perpetuates from generation to generation. So those are my surprises. If I was stranded on a desert island, I would probably want, sounds cheesy, but I would want my phone because number one, I could communicate and get help. And number two, I could also use my phone very creatively. I can do video art, I can take photographs, I can also write and make messages and maybe write a story about my experiences or a journal about my experiences. And so here's where technology becomes not just essential for survival, not, you know, it becomes a tool for survival, but it also becomes a creative tool. And so, you know, a lot of people are now making art on their phones every day, and maybe they don't even call it that, whether they're posting on social media or, you know, using some of the apps in creative ways. But yes, I also want that, that tool because I want to get off the island if I'm stranded. So that's also a practical reason.